And the first speaker is Dr. Cynthia West. She's a keynote speaker for this session. And she's going to speak upon connecting forest products to the forest. So welcome, Dr. Cynthia, and the floor is yours, please.
All right, good morning or afternoon or wherever you may be joining from. I appreciated getting the invitation to come and talk with you today. And it was a very short time ago, and I was thinking about, well, what would I like to do with this time? And I was thinking I wanted to start a conversation. I think it is time that we begin to start a conversation of looking at connecting forests with forest products. Myself, I am both a forester and a wood scientist. I've worked as a forester, and I have worked as a wood scientist. And it seems that we meet separately. We talk about forest management, forest conservation, with one convening, and we talk about the use and application of wood as a renewable material in other applications and other convenings. But today, we need to really be thinking about how we join our two enterprises, managing and conserving forests, with responsible use of renewable materials as a solution for the greatest crisis that our world has faced in the entire time of humanity, and that is climate change. The climate crisis is real. It is here. It is disrupting lives, economies, communities around the globe. We see this. We can't avoid it anymore. We see massive disturbance brought on by extreme temperatures, drought, severe storms. And now we're seeing the results of that as climate refugees seek shelter and homes and places to source water and food and other places from where they have lived. We know that the climate crisis is generated because of massive quantities of greenhouse gases that we have put into the atmosphere. And we know that our forests and our oceans help to regulate that by absorbing carbon dioxide. In the US alone, 14% of our emissions, our annual emissions, are absorbed by our forests. They cover approximately 1/3 of the land area of the US. But this is simply not enough to offset the continued emissions from our country and globally. Nations have joined in agreements to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and have pledged to do so. And so as a result, there are many new technologies that are being developed, but still, as we look to the end of this century, in 2100, we know that the emissions that we have already put into the atmosphere, what we will continue to add to the atmosphere over that time period, is going to continue to disrupt our weather systems, increasing temperatures, and put at risk many of the places that we on the earth that we live. All right. So where I'm going with this is that our things that we grow are renewable. Our forests, our agricultural products, plants. Those are the only renewable materials that we have on the earth. And from these renewable materials, as demonstrated by all of the speakers over the several days of this conference, you'll see there's incredible materials and uses, and we can renew and regrow these materials. Now, why I say let's connect the forests with the forest products is that we need to account for all of the carbon pools that our forests and wood products provide us as opportunities for carbon sinks to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere today and to reduce the emissions for the future. When we think about our forests and we measure our forests globally, we look at the carbon that's stored in those forests in major pools, below ground, above ground, and dead and down wood. But we need to also look at the other carbon pools that are produced from our forests, and that is in our harvested wood products. And by accounting for those materials that come from our forests that continue to store carbon as long-lived forest products, or substitute for products and production processes that emit additional carbon to the atmosphere, we can reduce and provide a carbon solution. Now, we kind of are in a place, in a conundrum when we talk about forests and forest products. So, because we've had great opportunities in terms of industrialization, we no longer depend on our forests to produce the products that we did in 2 centuries ago, or even in the last century. And so in the US, for example, as European settlement, we cut our forests for use in fuels, for fuel. We cut our forests for use in products and homes and industrial materials. And in the East, but we have regrown those forests. And so it's a great example of how our forests are renewable and can provide solutions for the climate crisis. Today, though, because we have advanced economies and technologies, we look upon our forests as precious, and that we want to retain forests as forests. And we have disconnected from the opportunity to use materials from our forests and maintain our forests as forests. And that is in incredible technology and development of wood products. And you'll hear a lot about that, from mass timber construction and CLT for tall wood buildings that substitute for steel and concrete, all the way to the smallest materials that come from wood at the nanoscale. They have incredible properties to develop new materials to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have a way of measuring the benefits of using wood in products and substituting for non-renewable materials, substituting processes that have higher greenhouse gas emissions. And that's using life cycle analysis. So where we account for the carbon and benefits from the forest to the harvested wood products, the substitution effects, and into continued storage of carbon in those products. I'll just use an example. I call it my old house. The house that my husband and I have and that we are restoring is approximately 150 years old. The floors are from the longleaf pine that were milled into flooring 150 years ago. Those trees were probably 150 years old when they were cut. And so if you can add all of that up, in the current floors, we've got 300 years of sequestered carbon. Now, we've had to replace some of that flooring as we restore. And so I went to a mill that is resawing materials that have been taken, beams out of old barns. And again, they were probably cut 150 years old ago, and they're 150 years old. And I'm going to put them back into my house, and I'm going to continue to store that carbon. So that is a long stored carbon product. We now have materials that we're working with at the nanoscale, and applying these materials as substitution for non-renewables and higher greenhouse gas emissions from products such as concrete. In the the process that we are testing with a number of partners now at the Forest Products Lab with the U.S. Forest Service, we're adding nano materials, nanocrystals, into a mixture with concrete to make cement. And what we're finding is we can reduce the amount of cement that's required to obtain the performance that you need structurally by 20%. So think of that. So in the highest worldwide in terms of emissions, it is the production and use of cement and concrete. If we can reduce that by 20% with a renewable material from wood, that's an incredible benefit around the globe. So as we begin, as we're thinking about and innovating, I am really, I want to say, I am hopeful that in the future, we can look at how we can both manage our forests for all the values and all the other benefits that we get from our forests, clean water, clean air, habitat, opportunities for recreation and renewal, and also be able to use and manage and remove some of that material for use in a lower carbon footprint future. We in the US are facing what we're calling our wildfire crisis in the West. So because of climate change, increasing temperatures, drought, changing weather patterns, extreme events, our forests are at risk from wildfire. And while forests can sustain and renew themselves, we have to allow them to have all the natural processes in that system to do so. By removing fire for a century, our forests are now overstocked. There's lots of fuel. And as we're seeing increasing drought, temperatures, and extreme weather, they're at risk for fire, not only in the US, but we see this around the globe, in Europe, in Australia. And so we have a choice to make. We can either remove some of that material, reduce the vulnerability of those forests in extreme fire events, and use that material, or we can go in and thin the forest, pile that material and burn it and release it to the atmosphere. So that's where we are working today within the U.S. Forest Service and with our partners in looking at how we can remove that material, continue to sequester the carbon, substitute and for other products and uses, and whether that is in producing energy or it is producing a product that can go into a long stored use for carbon. So I challenge us all today. I just wanted to come and talk with you and to introduce this conversational topic of being able to look at addressing this dynamic tension between conservation and managing our forests as forests, and being able to use material that is renewable to substitute for other materials and other processes that can reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases, as well as benefiting by storing carbon. So I invite you to reach out and talk to a forester and to begin to look at how we can do this to account fully for the carbon benefits from forests and the use of wood as a product, whether it is fuel or it's a long stored product in the building, or it's this intermediate substitution in products such as concrete. So thank you very much for the invitation. Like I said, it was just a short while ago, and I was really thinking about what I wanted to use this time for. And I really do want us to begin those conversations of looking at how we can successfully manage forests as well as utilize them. We're beginning to see emergence of great examples around the globe of conservation and benefits and payments to landowners for managing forests, and also for sustainable harvest and use of those forests. So I encourage you to reach out across the aisle to those to foresters and to conservationists, and for those individuals and organizations that value forests as forests and all the values there, and to look at ways that we can begin to account for all the benefits of the forest, including in the harvested wood products and use of renewable materials. We only have one way of creating and using renewable materials, and that's what we grow from the earth. And so the earth is precious. It is sustaining life. And without water, clean air, and soil, life will cease on this planet. And I don't want to mean being dramatic, but I want to say, you know, as I have advanced my career and thought about what I wanted to contribute as a professional, and that is in the future, is really looking to the future of all of our children and the world's children. When I started my career and began to look at working with modelers of looking at climate change to the end of the century in 2100, that was for 20 years ago, you know, 2100 seemed extraordinarily long and difficult to perceive. But today I can perceive that. I just spent the weekend with my grandchildren, and in 2100, they will be 87, 82, and 79. They will have children and grandchildren. And with what I know, both as a forester and as a wood scientist, as working in climate, mostly for the last decade, you know, I'm very frightened about their future, about having enough water, of extreme events, and where they will be and where their children and grandchildren, what the challenges that they will face. I'm worried about that. And so I think, you know, with all of our technology and our advanced science and wood science, I think we can provide solutions so that by the end of this century, all of our children and grandchildren will be in a better place, looking towards a better future than what we have today. So thank you very much for indulging my conversation. And I encourage you to create your own conversations of looking at climate solutions through the use of wood and connecting the products to the forest, so we account for all of our carbon pools. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cynthia. It was very, very interesting views that you have presented, and I opened discussions, and if anybody who would like to have some questions and something you want to ask Dr. Cynthia, she's such a learned lady, and I hope that a lot of questions might be coming to you. Okay. There's one question from Lakshika. She's asking, she wants to know what interdisciplinary approaches are currently being used or should be used in US to merge forestry with other research fields.
So how are we matching forestry with the use of wood products? Okay, so yes, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. Yes, one of the ways that we are doing this is developing, I will call metrics and measures and standards for accounting for carbon from the forest all the way through the harvested wood product to the extent of the product in use to the grave, so cradle to grave. Where we can advance this is really thinking about this as a concept of cradle to cradle. So in other words, we grow a tree, we harvest the tree, we use that material in a product, and we return that back to the soil. So we extend the product's use and life, and then we can reuse it, we can recycle it, and then we return it to the soil for an extended carbon benefit. For extending it from cradle to grave in life cycle assessments to cradle, and looking at how we can do that. And the other thing that we can do is to develop standards for accounting of this material, so that we can continue to improve the metrics and measures for life cycle assessment and accounting, and to be able to look at different solutions and the costs and benefits from those from a carbon perspective. Thank you.
Okay, then just a small question to you, Dr. Cynthia. How much forest area do you think should be under conservation, and how much should be under plantations?
Well, you know, so do we have to choose? I mean, I think that for example, I'll just use from the U.S. You know, 3 3/4 of our forests are privately owned. Only about 1/4 of our forests are managed by government, whether that's federal government, state government, or local government. And so, you know, one of the things that we want to do is encourage landowners to retain their forests. The biggest risk that we're facing today in forests is land use conversion from forest to non-forest use. And so whatever, if it benefits the landowner from producing a product and through plantations or managing natural forests, I don't think we need to, you know, get tied up in deciding which is better or which is not better, because it is up to the landowner in terms of the benefits. We want to retain forests as forests, whether in plantations or in natural forests. And we know that that we will need some plantation area, just like we have agriculture, and we rotate crops, you know, to produce products. So it's not one or the other, but it's how do we have a composition and a portfolio of all.
Okay, thank you. There's another question coming to you, madam. This is from IWCS. In the UK, we struggle to get people to train in forestry and wood science. As a degree, this is no longer exists there. How are you encouraging people to join the sector in the US?
You know, we struggled for a long time too in that. And here's what I have noticed, and I've worked at both universities and education and forestry and wood science. And what I'm finding is this generation, we're looking at, you know, the 18-year-olds to 35, that generation's coming up, are very different. And they're different in terms of their choices, their consumption. They're different in terms of their views of their types of careers. And what I have seen over the last decade is emergence of what I call interdisciplinary programs around environmental science. It's not forestry as we traditionally think about it, but it's environmental science. And these programs are producing students and graduates that have the same background and knowledge, and maybe not traditional forestry, you know, but they do understand forests, grasslands, the environment, water. And actually in our agency in the Forest Service, we're hiring more and more of those students into professions. And so I think we need to look beyond our traditional programs, also in terms of material science. I'm seeing in engineering schools, in chemistry, in material science, and that we're seeing more and more curriculums embrace and look at renewable materials. Remember, there's only one place you can get renewable materials, and that's what we grow from the ground in our forests and in agricultural production and in grasslands.
Okay, thank you very much for this wonderful explanation. And okay then, Dr. Cynthia, thank you very, very much. And we really had a very informative talk from Dr. Cynthia, who is Director of Forest Products Lab and Northern Research Station within the USDA Forest Service. Sorry, I didn't introduce you earlier because I think most of us know about you and have heard a lot about you. So there was no need for any introduction for such a personality. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the time today. And I am glad to visit with anyone in terms of how do we solve some of these problems and creating more interdisciplinary opportunities to advance wood science as a solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.